It's a very real pleasure for me to welcome all of you here. So I have this terrible responsibility to be the timekeeper. That means I have to say please. Okay, you know what I mean. It's always difficult. But anyway, this very wonderful room is in the Regional Council of Île-de-France. And so it's maybe very formal, but it's what we want to do with you is to have open discussion for launching this network today. In my position, I know that for a long time, in charge of institutional relations for HI, we are strongly involved in a lot of networks because we know, for our long experience in the world, that we can succeed in changing behaviors and policies and to open the mind and make the things better for people with disabilities if we are in networks. So this is the goal today, is to be all together present for the launching of this new network, which is GUDIN, the Global University and Disability International Network. So I just want to say a last word. We need to share experiences, good practices, questions maybe, and also suggestions to have something concrete to make access to higher education for everyone, and especially for people with disabilities all around the world. So just to open this formal session, I would like to introduce Pierre Deniziot here. Pierre Deniziot is the special delegate for disability in this Regional Council of Île-de-France.
Thank you, Mr. the Senator of Iowa, Tom Harkin, Mr. the President of Humanity and Inclusion, Mr. Dargnies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so delighted to welcome you here in the name of Valérie Pécresse, President of Paris Region Council, for the launch of the Global University Disability and Inclusion Network. In this auditorium, the members of Paris Region Council vote many measures to improve disabled people's daily life. We work hard to improve access to public transport, education, sports, leisure, culture, and tourism, for example. But our priority is to help them to get access to the labor market. In France, disabled people unemployment rate is twice as high as able-bodied people unemployment. It's the first reason of their social exclusion because it leads to loneliness and precarity. Companies in France are legally obliged to hire at least 6% of disabled people. It is something few countries in the world do. But despite this good intention, it is hard for companies to respect the law because they don't find skilled enough people. Of course, clichés about disability within society and companies may be partly responsible for the unemployment rate. But really, the skill level problem is the heart of this issue. Since February 2005, law has significantly allowed the better access to school for children with disabilities. Inclusion is not perfect yet, but slowly things change. Nevertheless, there are fewer students when the level increases. In fact, teachers usually fail to strongly support and motivate them. In fact, disabled students and their family usually feel a huge lack of self-confidence. We, as politicians, have to allow disabled students to fulfill their ambition, to reach their highest potential, and to get educational and professional success. Universities have a prominent role to play. In France, 75% of disabled students are personally assisted. Our universities create dedicated services which are becoming more and more professional. But there is so much left to do. Personal assistance during the classes, during their educational background can still be improved. Professors in higher education are not made mindful of disability issues. Not only French universities have to deal with those issues. In your own countries, your universities experience the same problems. In order to overcome, we have to share our projects, our best practices, our experiences. This is why Paris Region Council supports the GUDIN. It was to pay tribute to Humanity and Inclusion Initiative, whose goal is to gather people who want to break the glass ceiling disabled students are confronted to. You all can rely on Valérie Pécresse, President of Paris Region Council and former Minister of Higher Education, to strongly support the development of this network. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deniziot, for these first words and to welcome our new network today in your building. And I want to give the floor now to Noël Dargnies, who is the new President of the Board of Humanity and Inclusion of the Federation. Please.
I would like to begin by thanking
Dargnies. Right. I would like to begin by thanking on everyone's behalf today's host, Mr. Deniziot, Mrs. Pécresse, which I know personally, and I know that she is very involved in all these topics, and the Regional Council, which welcomes us here in this historic Congress room in the very heart of Paris. As the Chairman of Humanity and Inclusion Federal Board, it's my privilege to briefly introduce you to our organization, which until a year ago was known as Handicap International. For the past 37 years, our core mission has been to work alongside people with disabilities and vulnerable groups exposed to disasters, conflicts, extreme poverty, and exclusion. Our goals: to stand by their sides and to support their quest for full, unfettered inclusion in society. What does this look like in practice? We ensure that no one's needs are ignored after a disaster, that no child is left on the margins of a playground, that no community is left locked out of their fields or paths because they fear weapons left from conflict, that no professional is overlooked for a job simply because of his disability. This crucial work has its roots in Thailand, where refugee camps in the 90s were crowded with traumatized Cambodians. There, we offered physical rehabilitation to victims of landmines. Then our action grew from the outrage we felt in Thailand, both geographically and thematically. Our teams began covering social activities, education, livelihoods, as well as emergency responses and even demining. And in 3 busy decades, we ran thousands of projects in more than 60 countries. Right now, our committed teams work in countries heavily impacted by conflicts: Yemen, Syria, Iraq. They also stand at the front lines of natural disasters, like the cyclone that struck Mozambique last month, or the earthquake that brought Nepal to its knees in 2015. 3,500 salaried staff fuel 400 projects, which benefit approximately 2 million people. Financial means are provided by 600,000 generous individual donors all over the world, as well as public institutions. Last year, they channeled 200 million euro into humanity and inclusion programs to help us pave a firmer path to inclusion. In addition to this field work, humanity and inclusion has always advocated against some of root causes of discrimination and also dangers that our beneficiaries face. Our first success in that field was 20 years ago, when we advocated for the global ban on anti-personnel landmines, the Ottawa Treaty. For setting and meeting this audacious goal, we were named co-recipients of the 1997 Nobel Prize. Today, we actively advocate against the bombing of civilians, specifically ending the use of explosive weapons with wide area impact in populated areas. We also drive a global charter on the protection of people with disabilities in humanitarian settings. Since 2015, we have been proud partners of the Harkin Summit, a premier gathering of disability employment actors held annually in Washington, D.C. We are pleased to organize this year in Paris the 4th edition of this summit, the very first outside the US. We begin tonight at the Quai Branly Museum and tomorrow at the Marriott Hotel. Senator Harkin will tell us more about this great gathering in a few moments. At the last Harkin Summit, we identified together with some American universities a real missing step as far as including higher education is concerned. International global initiatives already exist for inclusive primary and secondary education, as well as international fora to promote employment of people with disabilities, for instance, the GBDN, Global Business Disabled Network. However, the higher education area was left out. If we can engage this group and improve their links to postgraduate employment, might we be one step closer to realizing Senator Harkin's vision of doubling the rate of disability employment in the next decade? Our recent contacts with various French grandes écoles have demonstrated that several initiatives, sometimes very promising, do exist. However, their successes are not yet captured and shared by an international organization. An organization which might, in turn, foster all these initiatives and disseminate good practices in higher education institutions worldwide. Humanity and Inclusion is willing to play the role of a catalyst for the creation of such an international network of higher education institutions that are willing to promote inclusion of disabled students. We are convinced that today's debates and discussions will confirm the need to develop such an international forum and will determine the practical way forward. Humanity and Inclusion stands willing to continue to accompany its network in its ambition to promote all around the world, and not only in the richest countries, a truly inclusive higher education approach. So it's with immense pride that I declare this funding session of the GUDIN open.
Thank you, Jean-Noël. If you want to succeed in access to higher education, we for sure need the support of the concerned agency of the United Nations, which is UNESCO. And I'm very happy to give the floor to Peter Wells, in charge of higher education section within the UNESCO Paris.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Vice President and President of the Council and HI. It's my very great pleasure to be here on behalf of UNESCO today with my colleagues from UNESCO who are sitting in the third row there, all of whom are dealing with the areas of inclusion and equity in various aspects of UNESCO's role. Despite commendable progress made over the last 2 decades to expand access to basic education, we must step up efforts to minimize barriers to learning and to ensure the inclusion of all learners in schools as well as in higher education institutions. As the lead agency for education in the United Nations system, UNESCO has always been committed to the promotion of the right to quality education of every child, every young person, and every adult. We are committed to promote inclusion and equity in and through education as the cornerstone of a transformative education agenda. Indeed, inclusion and equity are at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. SDG 4, Sustainable Development Goal 4 on education, urges all member states, all countries, to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and to promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. We should ensure that no one is left behind. It is therefore essential that we tighten our efforts to guarantee the right to quality education without discrimination or exclusion of any kind. This requires greater awareness within societies to counter discrimination and exclusion, to recognise the contribution of all citizens to well-being, progress and diversity. It requires schools and higher education institutions to provide accessible and relevant education for all. It requires addressing diverse educational needs through an enabling, inclusive learning environment. It requires teachers who are adequately trained and supported to do so. People with disabilities often suffer from blatant educational exclusion. The stigma of not expecting people with disabilities to attend a higher education institute must change, and it must start with people with disabilities. There should be resources and accommodations that are accessible to students with disabilities in institutions to be able to attend and graduate from a higher education institute. The most common question that people with disabilities face after graduating from a post-secondary education is what to do next. Many do not have the option of attending a college or a university, like their non-disabled peers, because of many obstacles such as accessibility, support, and minimum standards for teaching methods. There are no minimum standards or approaches to inclusive teachings in higher education institutes. Therefore, many students with disabilities do not have the same opportunity to attend a certain school or study a certain topic and a major of their choice. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not unusual for someone with a disability to have talents, creativity, skills, and abilities. Turning slightly more now to our work in higher education UNESCO, since this is a launching of a new network. Many of you may be aware that we have a network of over 750 UNESCO chairs around the world in all 5 regions of UNESCO's work, all geographic regions. And over 25 of those are working on some area of inclusion, from special needs to inclusion at higher education, inclusion TVET, teacher education for inclusion, etc. So I believe this network, the new GUDIN Network, will also find friends within that network with whom you will be able to work. I would also take this opportunity to inform you of a major UNESCO International Forum on Inclusion, which will take place in Colombia in September, and which will also include a strong element on higher education and inclusion. And by inclusion in UNESCO, we don't only mean disabilities being physical or learning disabilities, hearing impaired, sight impaired, etc. But we also mean socially and economically disadvantaged groups, to indigenous peoples, to non-traditional learners of all ages, either those returning into higher education after a period of work, or those entering into higher education for the first time later in life as part of a lifelong learning community from the institutions that serve these local needs. Finally, I would also like you to mention that you may be aware that every 2 years or every year we publish the Global Education Monitoring Report, and the 2020 publication is dedicated to the aspect and sphere of inclusion in education. I will leave my comments there for you now, but I would like to take this opportunity to wish to Humanity International and the launch of this new network, GUDIN, all success, and we at UNESCO are on standby to help you, support you, wherever we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I have not a pleasure, it's an honor for me to welcome Senator Tom Harkin. Tom Harkin is inspiring us in this process of discussion to create this network, and we will discuss on this in a few minutes. So the Senator Tom Harkin served in the United States Senate from 1984 to 2008 and 2014, excuse me.
You cut me short.
And during your long political action, you are the principal of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is something very important in the development of the access of all human rights for people with disabilities in the US and also now in many countries in the world with this Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And you are also the founder of the Harkin International Disability Employment Summit. And we were present in this summit 2 years ago, I think 3 years ago. And because of this summit, we discovered the important action you created, and now we have to follow on this, opening this access to employment through access to higher education. So thank you so much for coming from the United States for these 2 days, and I give the floor to you for a few minutes. I see you watching your watch.
My time is already out. Jean-Marc,
Please.
Jean-Marc, thank you very much. Thank you to Monsieur Deniziot for helping us get this space today. To Monsieur Jean-Noël Dargnies for his great leadership of humanity and inclusion, and to Peter Wells, UNESCO. I must say, Peter, I was wondering where I was going to be in September. I guess I'm going to be in Colombia now. Well, we'll have to learn more about that. But thank you, and it's an honor to be here. First of all, there are two entities. One is the Harkin Institute at Drake University in Des Moines. The president of Drake is here with us today, Dr. Martin, and you will be hearing from him later on one of the panels. A subsidiary of that is the Harkin Summit Harkin International Summit on employment of persons with disabilities. When we started that 4 years ago in 2015, we sat around a conference table at Andy Imperado's office in Washington, D.C. Hervé Bernard was there, and Micah Bevington from what was then called Handicap International. And so they were very instrumental in getting us started on this pathway of having international summit conferences on employment of persons with disabilities. So I want to thank Hervé for getting us started 4 years ago and for having us such a close association with HI. In my former profession, politics, it was often said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Well, as you can see, the Harkin Institute is HI. And since this HI started many years before us, we are imitating HI. And so that's a form of flattery. So we have two HIs. But the summit is what I'm focusing my attention on, and that is employment. I have been involved all my life in different aspects of disability rights, with the American Disabilities Act and working with the UN on the development of the CRPD. But now in my retirement, I want to focus only on employment because it's such a linchpin for independent living or participation, equal opportunity, fulfillment, and inclusion. So many people are not included because they're not part of the workforce. So I hadn't thought, quite frankly, about higher education being a part of that until, again, Hervé Bernard shows up and says, hey, I've got this idea for a global university network utilizing higher education for improving employment possibilities. And so we had a pre-conference meeting on this last year, connecting higher education to this global effort. And I'm just so happy to see that this momentum is continuing and that HI is, again, behind it and promoting it. And we at the Harkin Institute and at the Harkin Summit will also be a very integral part of this new area of higher education. One of the biggest stumbling blocks to entering the workforce for persons with disability is getting work experience, and universities can play a big role in that, helping young people with disabilities get internships, paid internships, summer employment, field experience. We happen to have here another couple of friends of mine, Dr. George Haggerty, who is the president of Beacon College in Florida, and his vice president, Steve Muller. And I gave a commencement speech here a couple of years ago, and now he just informed me they are now placing students with disabilities in paid summer internships with companies. So again, they're off and running and doing that, and we want to see that expand again globally. Also in higher education, enrolling students with disabilities so that they are integrated in the student population, and not just for the students with disabilities, but for students without disabilities, so that when they graduate, they work together. They're included together in the workforce, not separated out. Universities can be a great source of collecting data and helping us with research. I don't want it to just be research, but they can help us with data collection. The other element, I know I'm going long, the other element that's so important is for universities in their teaching elements to incorporate disability awareness and disability rights. Oh, for example, in the business schools, how many business schools actually have a course of study for students who are going to get an MBA, a master's in business, about how you set up HR systems to go out and recruit people with disabilities to come in the workforce? That should be a part of the course of study, not just in business school, everything. Liberal arts, music, art, architecture. I even said today, Jean-Marc, I said even dentistry. Do they have courses to teach dentists how to be aware of and sensitive to persons with disabilities? Probably not. And so this whole thing is just teaching future professionals to be aware of and to incorporate within their employment activities persons with disabilities in the professions and in careers, and not just in what we might say employment, but in careers and professions. So we want to encourage this. Innovations that are happening in every field, robotics, artificial intelligence, all of these fields. A part of it needs to have the universities involved in both disability awareness, disability education, disability recruitment, and reaching out to companies. When companies, and this will be my last one, Jean-Marc, when companies come in to recruit students, how many of them have a sign up? We actively recruit persons with disabilities in our workforce to make them feel welcome, that they're welcome to come and interview with them for future jobs. So again, I'm so grateful to this HI for starting this, and we at the Harkin Summit are just honored to be a part of it and to do what we can to help promote this concept of higher universities. So I think that I will end on this, what Monsieur Dargnies said, that I had laid a challenge down in 2017 to double the rate of employment of persons with disabilities in 10 years. This can be a key element of getting university involved and actually making that goal a reality. Thank you.